They didn't look at me as family. Not even for a second. The day my grandfather died, the house was full, teary faces, whispering relatives, fake consolations. But when I walked in, every conversation stopped. Their eyes flicked toward me like I was an intruder at my own bloodline's funeral. And that was the moment I realized they had erased me long before the will was ever opened. My name is Elena Hart, but to most of my extended family, I was the girl her father left behind. My mother died when I was young, and my father remarried, moved away, and built a shiny new life. Grandfather was the only person who visited me, wrote to me, remembered my birthdays. So when he passed away, nothing in the world could have kept me from being at his funeral, no matter how unwelcome I felt. The Hart estate was massive, old, and proud, just like my grandfather. A 3-story mansion with ivy crawling up its stone walls, windows lined with carved oak frames, and chandeliers that could blind anyone who stared too long. Walking inside felt like stepping into a world where I was never allowed to belong. A world built on inherited pride and carefully curated reputation. I arrived alone, wearing a simple black dress my mother once owned. As I stepped inside the foyer, my Aunt Margaret raised a perfectly plucked eyebrow. "So you came," she said like it was a surprise. I forced a polite smile. He was my grandfather. She didn't respond. My cousins Ben and Lily stood by the staircase whispering. They paused when they saw me. Lily gave me a thin, pitiful smile. Ben didn't bother pretending. To them, I had always been the outsider with no wealth, no status, no contribution to the family's image. Every room I entered, conversations quietly died. I heard fragments of their murmurs. "Why is she here? She barely visited. Is she even listed?" It didn't matter that they never invited me. It didn't matter that I spent years trying to connect, only to be pushed away. To them, blood only mattered when it came from the branches they respected. The funeral service was elegant, orchestrated like a royal ceremony. Everyone cried pretty tears. Everyone hugged the right people. Everyone pretended to be devastated. But I saw the truth in their eyes. They were waiting, not for the burial, not for closure. They were waiting for the will. Grandfather was wealthy, incredibly wealthy. His businesses, land, properties, investments, everything had been passed down through generations. To the family, his death meant opportunity, and I was nothing but a variable they expected to be erased. After the burial, the lawyer invited the family to the mansion's study for the reading of the will. The room smelled like old books and cigar smoke, his favorite place. My chest tightened as I stepped inside. I took a seat in the corner, away from everyone else. Aunt Margaret noticed and smirked. "You might want to stand, dear," she said patronizingly. "This won't take long for your part." She expected my name to be buried at the bottom, if mentioned at all. The lawyer, Mr. Winslow, cleared his throat and opened the thick envelope sealed with my grandfather's wax emblem. "Per the request of Mr. Jonathan Hart," he began, "all beneficiaries will remain present until the reading is complete." Ben leaned back confidently. Lily crossed her arms, already picturing herself redecorating the mansion. Aunt Margaret clasped her pearl necklace like she was blessing her future fortune. No one looked at me. No one even acknowledged I existed. The will began with expected formalities. To charities, old friends, longtime employees, each received thoughtful contributions. People nodded politely, though some looked irritated at every dollar not going into their pockets. Then came the distribution of properties. To my daughter, Margaret, to my grandson, Benjamin, to my granddaughter, Lillian. Their names were followed by assets, properties, bank accounts. Each announcement boosted their smug smiles. And then, unexpectedly, Mr. Winslow paused. His eyes lifted slowly from the document. "And finally," he said, "to my granddaughter, Elena Hart." The room fell silent so abruptly, I could hear my own breath. Aunt Margaret actually turned around to stare at me, like she had forgotten I existed. My cousins leaned forward. Everyone waited for the punchline. The pathetic charity, the symbolic gesture, the scrap. But Mr. Winslow continued, and his next words sliced through the room like a blade. "I leave to Elena Hart full ownership of the Hart Mansion, the surrounding estate, and the controlling shares of Hart & Co. Effective immediately." The air vanished. Ben's jaw dropped. Lily went pale. Aunt Margaret's hand flew to her chest, as if she had been physically struck. I sat frozen, unable to process the magnitude of what I had just heard. The mansion, the company, controlling shares. Grandfather didn't simply include me, he entrusted me with everything they valued most. The room erupted. "What? That's absurd. She has no experience. This must be a mistake." The relatives who ignored me minutes earlier, now stared at me like I was an intruder who had stolen their inheritance. Mr. Winslow remained unfazed. Mr. Hart made his intentions clear. There will be no contesting the will. He stated explicitly, Elena is the only one who truly understood me. The others understood only my money. A heavy silence followed, and in that silence, something inside me shifted. For the first time, I didn't feel like a stranger. The house, the legacy, the future, it was mine. Not because I was lucky, but because someone finally saw my worth. As people began shouting and arguing, I stood up quietly. My legs were trembling, but my heart was steady. I walked toward the door while they argued about my inheritance like vultures fighting over a carcass. Before leaving the study, I turned back. They were too busy yelling to notice. But I whispered anyway, to myself more than to them. You treated me like I didn't belong, but he knew I did. That day, I entered the mansion as an outsider. But I walked out, as the heir they never expected. The moment I stepped out of the study, the noise behind me felt like a storm slamming against a closed door, furious, chaotic, desperate. I didn't linger. I walked through the hallway with slow, steady steps, my mind still racing from the shock of the will. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, but beneath the adrenaline, a strange calm flowed through me. Grandfather had made his choice. And for the first time in my life, the choice favored me. Outside the mansion, the air was cold, crisp, almost cleansing. I breathed deeply, letting the fresh scent of pine and winter air settle my nerves. The family was still inside, no doubt bargaining, arguing, and plotting. They had always been that way, united only when an opportunity appeared. But I knew this, they would come for me next. I didn't run away. I stood tall at the bottom of the steps, watching the gray sky slowly darken. I wasn't the girl they ignored anymore. I wasn't the inconvenience they dismissed. I was the owner of everything they had built their lives around. That truth alone would bring out sides of them I had never seen before. The double doors burst open behind me. Aunt Margaret stormed out first, her heels striking the marble steps like angry punctuation marks. Elena, she said sharply, we need to talk right now. I faced her calmly. About what? She blinked, as if shocked I wasn't already apologizing or offering to negotiate. About correcting this situation. Before I could respond, Ben and Lily joined her. Grandfather was confused, Ben said. He didn't mean to leave everything to you, you can't handle it. You don't even know how the company works, Lily added. Their voices were firm, authoritative, like they were delivering instructions, not voicing opinions. It was fascinating, really. Less than an hour ago, I was invisible to them. Now I was the center of their world, not because they cared about me, because they cared about what they lost. Aunt Margaret softened her voice. Elena, dear, we can help you. You're not prepared for a responsibility like this. Sign the controlling shares over to me, and I'll make sure you're taken care of. A monthly allowance. A room here in the mansion. She offered the deal like it was a gift, like I should be grateful. A slow, bitter laugh escaped me. You want me to hand everything over to the people who treated me like a stranger. Ben stepped forward, lowering his voice. You owe us. We're the ones who kept the business alive. I held his gaze. And I'm the one grandfather trusted. Their expressions hardened instantly. The pretense of politeness evaporated. This is ridiculous, Lily snapped. You don't belong here and you know it. She said it like a fact, like a rule carved into stone. But something had changed in me. Their words didn't pierce the way they once did. I wasn't the abandoned granddaughter who tiptoed around their judgments. I wasn't the outsider begging for space at their table. I finally realized, belonging is not given, it's claimed. I stood taller. You're right, I said softly. I didn't belong here before. They smirked, thinking they had won the moment. But now, I continued, I own this place, and I'm not handing over anything. The silence that followed was sharper than any insult they had thrown at me. Their eyes widened. Their faces tightened. They didn't expect a challenge. They expected compliance, submission, gratitude. But I wasn't their frightened shadow anymore. Ben's voice rose. This isn't fair. I met his glare. Fairness never mattered when it was happening to me. Aunt Margaret's lips trembled with rage. Jonathan made a mistake. You are not capable. I'll learn, I said, cutting her off. Just like he believed I would. She looked like she wanted to scream, but we were still outside the mansion, still visible from the windows. She swallowed her fury with a painful stiffness. This conversation isn't over, she hissed. You will regret this arrogance. They left me there on the steps, fuming, whispering to each other, plotting their next approach. I didn't chase them. I didn't explain myself. I didn't apologize. I simply watched the family I had always wanted to be a part of retreat into the mansion that was now mine. When they were gone, I finally sat on the cold stone railing, letting the weight of everything sink in. It felt surreal, overwhelming, beautiful, terrifying. Grandfather had trusted me with a legacy generations old. I could hear his voice in my mind, calm, wise, patient. You're stronger than they know, Elena. I touched the mansion key the lawyer had given me. Heavy, cold, real. This wasn't just a house. It was proof. Proof that I wasn't invisible. Proof that someone saw value in me when everyone else saw nothing. But I also knew the inheritance came with responsibilities. Legal, financial, emotional. Managing a major estate and a corporation was not an overnight task. If I wanted to honor his trust, I had to prepare myself, quickly, quietly, strategically. That night, I didn't enter the mansion through the grand front doors like a queen claiming her territory. I walked in humbly, silently, the way I always had. But this time, the halls didn't feel foreign. The portraits didn't feel judgmental. The walls didn't feel restricting. I felt something I had never felt before: power. The family avoided me through dinner. They sat at the dining table discussing business matters, pretending I didn't exist. I sat at the far end, eating slowly, listening more than speaking. I noticed it all: the subtle tension, the fake politeness, the cracked facade of unity. Later that night, as I explored my grandfather's study, I found a letter sealed with his handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. "Elena," it began, "if they had seen you the way I did, you wouldn't be reading this alone." My throat tightened. The letter continued. "I leave you everything because you deserve the chance they never gave you. They see you as a stranger, but you are the heart of this family's future. Be patient, be smart. They will come to you soon, pretending to love you, pretending to care. Remember why they're coming." The letter ended with a line that wrapped around my heart and held it firmly. "Do not let them take from you what I have given." I wiped my eyes. He knew. He knew exactly what would happen. And he was right. Because the next morning, at the mansion door, I heard the first knock. Soft, hesitant, too polite to be sincere. Aunt Margaret stood there, forcing a smile. Their masks were ready, their strategies set, their voices rehearsed. The fight for the inheritance had only just begun. The knock on the door echoed like a challenge, sharp and deliberate. I took my time before opening it, letting them wait, letting the weight of the past 10 minutes of panic settle in their chests. Aunt Margaret, Ben, and Lily were there, standing in a line like soldiers ready for battle, their smiles tight, their eyes flashing with anger and fear. They had rehearsed this moment for years in their minds, thinking it would be about control, intimidation, or coaxing me into surrender. They didn't know I had spent the night planning my next moves. "Good morning," I said casually, holding the door open just enough for them to step inside. My voice was calm, controlled, almost detached. It unnerved them immediately. Aunt Margaret's lips twitched, her practiced smile faltering as she adjusted her pearls nervously. "Elena, we just wanted to discuss some family matters," she began, in that syrupy voice that had always masked manipulation. I leaned against the doorframe and crossed my arms. "Family matters or business matters?" I asked, the words dripping with subtle weight. Ben's jaw tightened. "You don't understand the responsibilities you're taking on. This estate, this company, it's too much for you to handle alone. You need guidance." I tilted my head, considering him carefully. "Guidance? You mean control. You want to dictate every decision I make because you can't accept that I now have what you've always wanted." His face flushed, but he didn't back down. He never had. I stepped aside and gestured for them to enter. "Then let's start with a few basics," I said. "The first thing you'll need to understand is that the rules have changed. I am the owner, I am in charge. And as of now, your place in this household is entirely dependent on how you behave." Their expressions shifted subtly, disbelief dancing in their eyes. They weren't used to a girl from their past, the one they had dismissed, speaking with authority. Aunt Margaret recovered quickly, a thin veneer of composure settling over her features. "Elena, you'll forgive me if I speak frankly. You're inexperienced. You lack the knowledge necessary to run this estate properly. You need a caretaker, someone to guide you." I smiled politely, soft but firm. "Thank you, Aunt Margaret. That is exactly why I have retained legal and financial advisors who specialize in estates and corporate governance. I will make decisions with their counsel, not yours. This is no longer about being inexperienced. It's about responsibility. Something you always took for granted." Lily stepped forward, her voice sharp and calculated. "You think just because grandfather trusted you, you're entitled to everything. We've been here working tirelessly. You were nowhere to be found." I met her glare with calm, steady eyes. "I wasn't present because I wasn't allowed to be. I wasn't given a chance to contribute. You and your brother treated me as though I were invisible. Today, the invisible becomes the visible." The dismissed becomes the decision maker. Ben's attempt to interrupt was cut short by a quiet, deliberate movement on my part. I held up a hand. No interruptions. Listen carefully because this is how things are going to be from now on. They exchanged glances, panic beginning to creep into their otherwise confident stances. The house, the company, the investments, they are all under my control. Any attempt to manipulate, deceive, or undermine me will have consequences. You are, in effect, my tenants. Your stay here, your access, your privileges, they are conditional. Aunt Margaret's face went pale, but she attempted to hold her composure. Elena, you're making a mistake. This is family, you can't just treat us like employees. I laughed softly, shaking my head. Family, you treated me like I didn't exist, like I was a stranger. Today I am not seeking revenge. I am asserting the only thing you refused to give me, respect. They had grown used to the idea that wealth and authority belonged to them by birthright, and my sudden claim threatened to shatter that illusion. I could see the subtle shift in their demeanor, the way their posture stiffened, their voices faltering as they realized that their usual intimidation tactics no longer worked. For once, they were not in control. Let's start with a list of grievances, I continued, my voice steady and commanding. Anything that has been done against me or my interests in this household or business shall be reviewed. Appropriate actions will follow. Ben opened his mouth to argue, but Aunt Margaret caught his eye and shook her head. She understood what I was doing, establishing control without the need for threats, creating fear through certainty and authority. Lily's eyes narrowed. You think you can intimidate us? She asked, but there was a slight tremor in her voice. We've survived without you. I tilted my head slightly. You survived without me, perhaps. But consider this, how long can you survive without my grandfather's legacy, without the authority he entrusted to me? The answer, as you will soon learn, is not very long. I moved to the living room, gesturing for them to follow. They hesitated, then obeyed, the first step in breaking their defiance. You will have your allowances, your rooms, and your privileges, I said, but you will act in accordance with rules that respect the dignity of everyone in this household. This includes myself, the staff, and anyone else under my authority. Aunt Margaret tried to interject, but I stopped her with a quiet, commanding glance. No exceptions, no special treatment. The era of entitlement ends today. She swallowed, lips pressed tightly together, realizing the weight of my words. For the first time, she wasn't dictating the narrative. She was listening. The tension in the room was palpable. I could see the subtle calculations running through their minds, plots, plans, schemes, but there was one thing they hadn't accounted for. I was no longer reactive. I was proactive, prepared, and strategic. I had advisors, lawyers, and a clear understanding of the estate's finances. I had waited, watched, and learned. I continued, softer now, almost conversational. I didn't come here to punish you personally. I came here to enforce fairness, accountability, and respect. That is all. My grandfather believed in me, and I will honor that trust. The words seemed to sting more than any anger could. Aunt Margaret's fingers tightened on her handbag. Ben's face was flushed with disbelief. Lily's jaw clenched as if she wanted to argue but knew she had no ground. The next 2 hours passed in tense silence, broken only by my explanations of the estate, the business, and the roles they would now play under my authority. I assigned oversight responsibilities, clarified expectations, and made it clear that deviation from these rules would not be tolerated. Every detail was deliberate, every word calculated. By the end, they sat defeated, slouched in the living room, their previous arrogance replaced by cautious compliance. They understood, finally, that the game had changed. The rules were mine now. Every glance, every word, every gesture would be measured against the new standard I had established. I paused at the grand piano in the corner, letting the weight of their quiet compliance sink in. For 10 years, they had treated me like a ghost, invisible, dispensable. Now I was the fulcrum on which the household balanced, and they knew it. Later that night, I walked the halls of the mansion alone. The rooms were silent, the air heavy with history, memory, and power. I realized that inheriting the estate wasn't just about wealth, it was about leverage, strategy, and patience. The family had underestimated me for years. Now they would have to navigate their interactions with me carefully or risk losing everything. I paused by the portrait of grandfather, the man who had always believed in me when no one else did. Thank you, I whispered. For seeing me, for trusting me, for giving me the chance to prove myself. His eyes in the painting seemed to shine back at me, approving, proud. I felt an odd sense of peace. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new confrontations, and new tests of my resolve. But I was ready. I had the authority, the insight, and the patience to manage not just the estate, but the fractured family that had once rejected me. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid. I sat by the fireplace, thinking through every interaction of the day. Every subtle threat, every glance of disbelief, every hushed whisper had been a puzzle piece I had placed carefully in my mental map. By the time I retired for the night, I had a plan for each family member. How to handle their ambitions, their resentment, their strategies to undermine me. The mansion was mine, the power was mine, and they knew it. I smiled faintly to myself, the first true, unshakable smile I had allowed in years. Because for the first time, I wasn't just a part of this family, I was in control of it. And now, every move they made would be under my watchful eye. Every whisper, every plan, every attempt to reclaim what they thought was theirs would be met with a quiet, unwavering resolve. I was no longer the girl they treated like a stranger. I was the one they had to answer to. The days that followed were a quiet storm beneath polished floors and chandelier light, a tension so thick it clung to the air like dust in an abandoned room, and I felt every ripple of unease circulating through the mansion as my family adjusted, reluctantly, bitterly, to my authority. But the real turning point came 1 week after the will was opened, on a morning as deceptively calm as glass. I was reviewing documents in the study when the door burst open, and our family lawyer strode in, pale and unsettled. "Elena, there's something you need to see," he said, handing me a sealed envelope with my grandfather's handwriting on it, sharp, elegant, unmistakable. My heartbeat stuttered as I broke the seal and unfolded the letter, the scent of old ink rising like a ghost. In it, my grandfather wrote with painstaking clarity that he had known, for years, how the family treated me. The whispering behind doors, the exclusion from decisions, the casual cruelty wrapped in politeness. He had watched, silently, as they positioned themselves around him like vultures waiting for the inevitable, and he admitted he had let them believe they were winning so he could see their true character. "You were the only one who visited without asking for anything," he wrote. "The only one who carried kindness without expecting reward. That is why everything is yours. They see wealth as entitlement, you see it as responsibility." I felt my chest tight, not with sadness but with a fierce, overwhelming validation I had never known I needed. Before I could steady myself, the lawyer cleared his throat and revealed the second part, a video recording made 3 days before my grandfather passed away. He nodded toward the screen on the desk, and I hit play. My grandfather appeared, frail but defiant. He spoke directly to the camera, directly to me. "Elena, if they fight you, remind them that I didn't choose an heir based on bloodline or seniority. I chose based on integrity. The will is ironclad. And if they push you, show them this." After the recording ended, the room felt heavier, as though his presence lingered, watching over me even now. I stood, squaring my shoulders, and walked out to the main hall where the family had gathered for what they assumed was another planning meeting. They sat around the long dining table, their eyes dragging to me with a mixture of hostility and hollow politeness. I placed the letter and the USB drive on the table and said simply, "He left more than the will." The shift was immediate. Aunt Margaret stiffened, Ben's eyes widened, Lily's breath caught. I played the video. They watched in frozen silence as grandfather explained everything they had done, every act of greed he had witnessed, every manipulative scheme he had quietly documented. Their faces cracked, rage, shame, disbelief all wrestling beneath the surface. When the video ended, I spoke with the calm of someone who finally held every card in the deck. "From today forward, transparency will be standard. Every transaction, every project, every request will run through my office. No exceptions." Aunt Margaret tried to protest, but her voice was weak, trembling. Ben slammed a fist on the table, standing up as though anger could rebuild his lost power. "You can't base our future on one video," he shouted. I looked him straight in the eye. "I'm not basing it on one video, I'm basing it on years of your behavior. The video simply confirms the truth." Lily, for once, didn't argue. Her eyes were glossy, her pride fractured. "So that's it," she whispered. "You're really taking everything." I shook my head. "I'm not taking anything. I'm managing what was entrusted to me. If you choose to work with me, you have a place here. If you choose to fight me, you leave with nothing." The silence that followed felt like a verdict. One by one, their resistance deflated. And in that moment, I saw the truth with painful clarity. They had never feared losing me. They had only feared losing the power they imagined was theirs by right. With the estate's new structure announced, I spent the next hours meeting with staff, organizing departments, reviewing contracts, and establishing the framework my grandfather trusted me to build. By sunset, the mansion felt different, lighter, more purposeful, as though decades of whispered poison had finally been cleared. Late that night, after the household had gone quiet, I sat alone on the balcony overlooking the gardens my grandfather used to tend. The air was cool, scented with jasmine, and the moon cast long shadows across the estate that was now undeniably mine. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who walked unseen through these halls, the one treated like a stranger by people who shared her blood. And I realized something profound. Distance wasn't what made me unreachable. Strength did. Integrity did. Knowing my worth did. They had treated me like an outsider until the will exposed the truth, until the legacy they tried to claim landed in the hands of the one they underestimated most. And now, as I looked over the land that held my history, my scars, and my triumphs, I knew this was not revenge. It was restoration. My grandfather had placed the future in my hands, not because I demanded it, but because I had earned it. For the first time, I felt the full weight and honor of that responsibility. I wasn't just the heir, I was the legacy bearer. And from this night on, no one, no family member, no outsider, no voice of doubt, would ever make me feel small again. I had become unreachable not because I walked away, but because I finally rose to where they could never touch me.